to go. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just letting people come in from the waiting room. We'll get started in a few minutes. We do have simultaneous translation available for this call today. So I want to share. Oh, thank you, Muhammed. The test worked. I'm going to share instructions for how to access the translation channel while people come in to the room. We will be having a simultaneous translator for our speakers. If you look at the bottom of the screen, there's a global icon for interpretation. You can select English if you'd like to hear the simultaneous translator, or select original if you want to hear everyone in their original language. We'll have both English and Hebrew speakers today. And if you have any questions about that, you can please mute yourselves. Thank you very much. And with no further ado, we'll get started. Welcome, everyone, to today's call on local elections that took place in Arab society, delayed due to the war, and findings from research about what the voter rates and what the outcomes say about trends. We're really grateful that so many of you are here today. It seems like it's a very difficult period. It's been a very difficult week. And I think it says a lot that many of you can come and listen to something quite specific and important about Arab society, which is representation in local government and those trends. It is just to connect us to recent events. It was really heartbreaking to hear that the only casualty, I mean, we're all grateful there were very few casualties. The only casualty in this weekend's attack was a young Bedouin girl. And this is indicative. In a sense, it wasn't very surprising for people in Arab society, recognizing the vulnerability of Bedouin in the Negev. And the fact that, and it's quite a leap to make the segue, but these are the kind of issues that equality and representation and the issues of Arab society in local government, in national government, can make such a difference. I just wanted to nod to the fact that that's what happened, that's the context that we're coming to this call with, when we think about what these trends and the findings that we're going to hear about in terms of the quality of representation for the Arab population in Israel. With that said as the context, I want to hand it off to Michal Barak, our Israel representative, to introduce the speakers and provide the framing of the call, and then she'll get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Liron. So hopefully hi everybody. Hopefully you all understood the interpretation and simultaneous translation that we have here. So I'm pleased to introduce our three speakers tonight here. We are partnering with Injaz, which is a non-profit organization, and we have here with us the CEO of Injaz, Imad Jaraisy. Injaz is a non-profit organization aimed to advance professional, sustainable infrastructures that effectively advance the needs and interests of the Arab municipalities. And together with others, they've conducted research outlining some of the conclusions and their observations and interpretation of the local elections that happened here in February. We have with us Dr. Rana Zaher. She has a PhD in linguistics, and she is now also a PhD candidate in sociology. And she's a lecturer at a few of the higher education institutions here in Israel. She was also a member of the municipality of Nazareth, and is also a board member of Injaz. And we have Dr. Muhammed Khalaily, who is the director of Qadaya. he is a researcher in IDI, and his PhD from which is in political science from Haifa University, is about local authorities. So we want to start with Injaz and with Imad Jaraisy, and just to hear a little bit about your work and about what is the significance of local authorities in Arab society in Israel. Why are they so important, and what do you do in Injaz for that? Please, Imad. So if you want to hear the translation, Imad is going to talk in Hebrew. Please click on the globe, the interpretation, and choose English.
Thank you, Michal, and thank you, all of you who are present. I apologize for not speaking English. We are trying to improve, and hopefully in future sessions I will be able to speak English, but it's also important to mention that we chose to speak in Hebrew because the messages we wish to convey to our sector, and by the way, I hope that you received it. The messages are very important and we wanted to clarify them to you, so I prefer to speak in a language I'm more fluent in. I think, and Michal and all the others, Injaz, in previous elections to local authorities, we would publish an analysis of the results, but this time we felt, out of our experience, especially over the past decade, in view of all the political changes which occurred in the Arab sector and government resolutions, we felt that this time the results of the elections have an impact on the entire Arab society, on the civil society organizations and the Council of Local Governance of Municipal Authorities. So we've decided to not suffice with a brief analysis, but an in-depth research with insights. We have insights on 8 different levels because the status of Arab local governance has strengthened, especially over this past decade. So we decided to conduct an in-depth research, and this is an opportunity to thank Muhammed Khalaily and Zaher from Injaz for their participation and their help and assistance in understanding the findings. Just a very important comment before I begin. Most of the data in the research address most of the Arab local authorities. That is, they are about the results of 84 local authorities, which also include the Druze local authorities, the Bedouin local authorities, both in the north and in the Negev. And if we go back to the question, Michal, I think there are 5 main reasons through which we can explain the importance and significance of the local authorities and in general Arab local governance. The first reason is that the elected leadership of the local authorities, of the local governance, automatically become the part of a mechanism representing the Arab sector, which is the National Council for Arab Mayors. And recently, the status of this organization has strengthened for various reasons, such as the decline of the parties, the strengthening of the independent faction within the Arab sector. This is why the status of this council and automatically the status and the position of the local authorities has also become more significant both in the Arab sector and in the Israeli society in general. The second reason is directly related to the basic perception of the status of local authorities as an important democratic element, because the chair of the local authority is the only one who is directly elected in Hebrew by all of their constituents. And we remember, we vote, we cast a ballot, we vote for the mayor we want, and there's another slip, another voting slip for the list for the city council. So that means that the residents both directly elect the mayor, but also a party or a list that can both support or criticize the choices of the elected mayor. So that means that they have an important stake in determining the policy of the local authority and the influence it has on the quality of their lives and the services they receive and the strengthening of the democratic discourse within the town or village or local authority. And another issue has to do with the change in the status or position of local governance from one that is perceived as a branch that carries out the policies of the central government. It is now more independent, and for example, the services it provides, such as educational or welfare services or regional and vocational services, because there is this view today that local authorities today are part of a cluster that provides regional services. So giving greater governance power to the local authorities, and which can balance or even restrict the power of the central government. A fourth reason is the fact that local authorities, the Arab local authorities, are the biggest, largest employer in the Arab sector. The local authorities responsible for employing teachers in elementary schools and junior high schools, and also in informal education, welfare, engineering. The Arab local authorities have become the largest employer in every town, in every village, and that makes them directly or indirectly the largest employer, because there are many organizations or local companies which provide services through the local authorities. The fifth and last reason is the weakening of the parties and some of the representative organizations of the Arab sector over the past decade, and Dr. Muhammad will explain more about that. The distrust in these parties, in these organizations, representative organizations, I think that this is yet another reason which further advances and enhances the position of the Arab local authority. Regarding Injaz, I'd like to mention 4 important points in view of all these developments in Arab local governance. First of all, we are trying to promote professionalism and the development of human capital through the provisioning of professional services, for example, establishing various fora, the fora of treasurers, of director generals of municipalities, in order to strengthen the democratic discourse inside local authorities through the establishment of the forum of leading mayors, through which we're trying to enrich the mayors through the development of negotiating skills and understanding the complexity of the central governance. And through these activities, through this fora, we are developing human capital within local governance, and in this way we are also trying to impact government decisions and national scale decisions that are relevant to local governance. Another point is developing some kind of a data bank about the Arab local authorities in order to understand the political measures and their impact on local governance, and I think that Injaz's research is a very good example for that. A third point, we're trying through collaboration with several civil society organizations and through collaboration with the Council of Arab Mayors to monitor the various government resolutions 5549 and other resolutions with respect to the implementation of those resolutions, and also to see whether government ministries are indeed adapting themselves in line with the needs of the Arab municipalities. And one last topic is the development of social and economic infrastructure in local governance to strengthen the financial resilience, for example, to establish economic units and units for economic development.
Thank you. So what we'll do now is move to Dr. Muhammed Khalaily, who will tell us a little bit about the current elections and the results in the current elections. And then Dr. Rana Zaher will tell us a little bit about the gender aspect of these elections and about representation of women. And then I'll open it to questions. So bear with us for a little more, and then we can have any questions answered. Muhammad, please.
Okay. Thank you, Imad. תודה לכולם, לכל מי שטרח והשתתף.
Thank you, everyone, to everybody who's taken the time to
אני
participate.
אציג למעשה את
I would like
הממצאים
to present the
באופן
findings,
נקודתי המתייחסים למערכת הבחירות
the
האחרונה
specific
שהתקיימו
findings
בפברואר
that
ומרץ
pertain to the
24
recent
אחרי
elections that took
דחייה
place in February and
שהתקפה
March of
בעקבות 7
2024
באוקטובר.
after they were postponed following the events of
ומלכתחילה
October
אני
7th. And from
אגיד
the
ואסייג
outset,
את עצמי
I'd like to say and
שמדובר
perhaps
בניתוח מאוד
qualify what I'm
ראשוני
about to say, that this is a
שאני
very
מציג בו את
preliminary
המגמות המרכזיות
analysis where I present the main
וניתוח
trends,
יותר מעמיק
and a
נמצא
more in-depth
במחקר
analysis
וגם
can be
בסיכום
found
של
in the research
עימאד
itself
בסוף
and in the
ההצגה.
summary of
אני
Imad
אסכם
at
את
the end of
מה
the
שאמר עימאד
presentation. I'm
במשפט
going to
אחד, אני
summarize
אנסה
everything
להיות
Imad
מאוד
said in one
תמציתי.
sentence. I'll try and be very
במשפט וציטוט של
succinct,
יוליוס
and
קיסר,
this is a quote from
שאמר
Julius
עדיף
Caesar,
להיות
who said it's
איש מספר
preferable
אחד
to be
בכפר
number
צבוע
one
מאשר
in a
מספר
modest
שניים
village
ברומא.
than number two in Rome.
הסיפור הזה מלמד הרבה על
And this, I think,
השלטון
teaches
המקומי
us
ועל
a lot
החשיבות של השלטון
about
המקומי
local
בעיני
governance and the
הציבור
importance of
הערבי.
local governance in the
כפי
view
שאמר
of the Arab
וציין עימאד,
population.
השלטון
As Imad
המקומי הפך להיות
said, the local
הזירה או
governance
הספירה
has
החשובה ביותר
become the most
עבור
important
הציבור הערבי
arena,
בגלל כל
for
הסיבות
the
שמנה
most important
עימאד,
sphere for the
היותו
Arab
המעסיק הגדול ביותר
community, because of everything Imad
בתוך
just told us, the
החברה
fact that
הערבית,
it's the largest employer
וגם על
within the
רקע
Arab
למעשה
society, and also
היעדר הייצוג ההולם של הערבים
because
בסקטור
of the
הציבורי בשוק
absence of
הפרטי,
adequate
השלטון המקומי הופך להיות
representation of the
יעד
Arab sector
עבור
in the
אקדמאים
private
ועבור
market. It
צעירים
becomes
מוכשרים
a
שמנסים
destination
לקבל
for
עבודה יוקרתית
academics
ויש
and
בהם
young
מקום להשקעה.
professionals who are trying to find
בנוסף
an
לכך,
attractive
מי
job
שנבחר
that
באופן
has some
מקומי,
clout, some
והוא
impact.
הופך
And
להיות
in
בעל כורחו חלק
addition,
מההנהגה הארצית של הציבור הערבי בגלל
because if you
מערכת
are elected
היחסים
to local
הסבוכה
governance, you
שבין
also
השלטון
become part of
המקומי
the
בין הוועד
national
הארצי לראשי
governance
הרשויות לבין
because
ועדת
of
המעקב. ראשי
the
הרשויות הם מרכיב
various
מרכזי
connections
משמעותי
between
וחלק
the
מרכזי
Council
מההנהגה של
of
הציבור
Arab
הערבי. כלומר,
mayors, which is a
החלטות
very important
שמתקבלות
element
בוועדת
in the
המעקב
leadership
העליונה
and also the higher
שותפים
follow-up
לראשי
committee.
הרשויות
And
המקומיות
the
הערביות.
decisions
לכן מי
reached
שנבחר
there
במקומי
are
הוא
all
הופך בעל
applied
כורחו להיות
to
חלק
the mayor. So
מההנהגה
anybody
הלאומית של
elected to
הציבור
local
הערבי.
governance also,
החשיבות, כפי
not
שציין
necessarily
עימאד, באה
willingly so,
לידי ביטוי
becomes part of the
בשני
national leadership. In
ממדים.
addition,
הממד
we can
הראשון
see
זה
two
התחרותיות.
dimensions. The
כלומר,
first
מידת
one is
התחרות המקומית בתוך
competitiveness,
היישובים
the
הערביים.
amount of
ואני
local
עכשיו אציג
competitiveness
למעשה
in Arab towns and
נתונים
villages.
הקשורים
I'm going
למספר
to present the
המועמדים
data
המתמודדים
related
לכל
to the
משרת ראש
number of
רשות,
candidates
ומספר
running
הרשימות
for
שמתמודדות לכל
every
מנדט,
mayoral
ועל הייצוג
office,
בבית
and
הנבחרים
also
המקומי.
the
כפי שניתן
representatives
לראות,
in the
מדובר
local council. And as we can
ב-950
see, we're talking about
מושבים בכלל הרשויות המקומיות
950
הערביות,
seats
על
in all of
950
the
מתמודדים
Arab local
892
authorities, and
רשימות, כלומר
892
כמעט רשימה
lists
אחת לכל מנדט.
are running for each position.
ועל
So almost a
85
list for every seat.
משרות
And the
או פוזיציות של
85
ראשי רשויות מתמודדים
positions of mayors, we have
326
320
מועמדים,
mayoral
כלומר
candidates, 326 mayoral candidates. That means
3.8 בממוצע. זה גידול
on
של
average. This is
0.1
an
לעומת הבחירות
increase of
שקדמו להן,
0.1
ואנחנו
in
מדברים
comparison
על
to the previous
למעשה
election. So we're
תחרות
talking
מאוד גדולה
about a major
בשלטון המקומי,
competition
מה שהופך את
in
האירוע הזה, הבחירות,
local governance, and this
לאירוע
turns
הפוליטי
this
בה"א
event,
הידיעה,
the elections, to
והבחירות
the
הופכות להיות
political
בחירות בסדר
event
העדיפות
with a
ראשון.
capital P.
עכשיו לגבי
Now,
הזהות
regarding
הפוליטית,
the
או הרקע הפוליטי,
political identity or the
ליתר דיוק,
political
של
background, to be more precise,
המועמדים
of
של
the
הרשימות
candidates
המתמודדות.
from the different
כפי שניתן
lists.
לראות
As
מהגרף,
we can see
רוב
here,
הרשימות
most of
שמתמודדות הן
the
רשימות
lists
חמולתיות,
that are running
כלומר
for
שהן
office
נשענות
are
על
clan
יסוד
affiliated. That
חמולתי.
means they rely
וכשאני
on
אומר על יסוד
the
חמולתי,
clan.
לא
And when I
בהכרח
say they
מייצגות
rely on the
חמולה אחת,
clan, it's not
ייתכן שהוא
necessarily
מערך
relying
חמולתי
on one
שהתאגד
clan.
והתאחד,
Perhaps it's several
והעיקרון
clans
המארגן שלו
that
הוא
join together,
החמולה,
and the
כדי
organizing
לזכות למעשה
principle for
בתמיכה
that
של
candidate
בני
is the
ובנות
clan
החמולה,
in order to get
ולכן
the
נוכל למצוא
support of
רשימה
the
שהיא
members of the clan. So
חד-חמולתית,
we
רשימה
can find a
דו-חמולתית,
list that
ורשימה שהיא מין
is
מערך
made up of
חמולתי,
one
אבל
clan,
היסוד
two
והבסיס
clan,
שלהם
or a setup of several clans, but still the basis is the clan, these clans. And I would like to distinguish between the clan as a social framework that relies on blood relation and the clan element, which uses it in order to achieve political achievements. And as you can see, the number of party affiliated lists is diminishing over the years. We're talking about only 7% of all the lists. These represent the political parties. We're talking about the parties that are represented in the higher follow-up committee of the Arab sector, and 2 and 4% are non-partisan and not clan affiliated, and usually it's either based on the female gender or the younger generation. Now, regarding the identity of the candidates, how much continuity do we have? How much change do we have in local government? 60% of all candidates who ran for mayoral office are new candidates. They are new to the arena of local governance. They did not serve as mayors in the past. They were not city council or town hall council members. So that means they're trying to run for office for the first time in the local elections. But it's also very important to say that this doesn't really represent the real trend. So out of the 85 or 74 local authorities, so the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of mayors ran again for office of mayors. So they do want governing continuity and continuity. And if we already talked about the importance of the local elections, and the first indicator that represents the importance of this element in the eyes of the Arab sector is the number of lists and number of candidates. There's another indication, which is the turnout. And if we compare over history, and also if we compare between Arab local authorities and Jewish local authorities, we can see a very significant and a serious gap between the two elements. And actually, we're talking about a difference of 36%. It's a huge gap. It's a huge difference. Over the years, the voting rates in the Arab sector used to be above 86%. These recent elections, in the previous elections, we did see a certain drop. Not such a big drop, but it definitely represents some undercurrents which are representing the Arab local governance as presented by Imad just a few minutes ago, the war. And of course, one cannot ignore the influences of the war. Another thing, the atmosphere. It wasn't the same atmosphere as we used to have in previous elections. You know, in previous years, in previous elections, you would enter the Arab towns and villages, and 2 months before the elections, you would see people rallying and street campaigns and parlor meetings, which called the Arab population to go out and vote. You know, they would compete on each and every vote. And this year, if you would walk into an Arab town or village 3 or 4 days before the elections, you wouldn't see anything. And that's because the atmosphere of the war, the implications of the war. But we cannot suffice with this explanation, because this is a very partial explanation, and it doesn't really represent the real sentiments of the Arab sector. One of the additional factors that led to this drop is the takeover of organized crime on the municipal arena. And we've seen in the last term of office, we've seen an increasing number of mayors who were threatened, severely, seriously threatened, and there were situations of shooting incidents and murder attempts of mayors and other public elected officials who weren't necessarily mayors. There was also an attempt to shoot them and kill them, and all of these things together came together, and that led to a drop in the voting percentages, in line with a trend of distrust in elected officials, as well as the professional local echelon within Arab municipalities, local authorities. And if you compare the situation in the in the Jewish sector in comparison to the Arab sector, that means that in the elections to the Arab local authorities are still the main election, that's the main arena, and it's the elections of first order, and that's in stark contrast to the Jewish sector, where the main elections are to the Knesset. This is where all, the budgetary pies determine security issues, boundaries, etc. are determined. And because of the competition, we just talked about the great number of candidates and slates and lists, and because the law, according to the law, the candidate needs to receive at least 40% of the votes in the first round of elections. And because of this division into clans and sub-clans within the Arab towns and villages, usually the elections are not decided in the first round. 2 weeks after the elections, that we have a second round or runoff elections, because it's very difficult to receive 40% of the votes in the first round, because there's such a large number of candidates, and that's why runoff elections are declared between the two who receive the highest proportion of votes. So it's another 2 tense weeks, and you can see the negotiations taking place during these 2 weeks between the 2 leading candidates and the other candidates who lost, and the lists who did receive representation in the city council. And during these 2 weeks, we have negotiations, distribution of the loot, of the budgetary pie, of the main positions, and this opens a window for politicization of local authorities. And ultimately, it boils down to the fact that it harms and undermines the professional capabilities of these local authorities. That means that 25% of the Arab towns and villages where there were elections, they couldn't decide after one round, and they went to a second round to runoff elections. Here, I can show you the range, the maximum point and the minimum point in the support percentages. And this chart, this table, shows you the level of polarization within Arab local authorities. So a mayor who was elected in the first round who received 41%, that's 41% of the votes. So he really barely won. And what this creates a local authority with an elected leadership that did not receive legitimacy of its entire constitution, and it undermines their legitimacy and the ability to effect a change a day after the election and to maintain a stable coalition. His political legitimacy is constantly undermined. And in the second round, as you can see, the percentages were a bit more than 50%, so it's also they barely won. But if you take what pulls these averages upwards are the towns and villages where there was only one candidate. There were 7 such localities, such communities that there was only one candidate. And this teaches about 2 trends. One trend is that this candidate was supported by one of the crime organizations. So this is why the other candidates didn't even dare run to compete with him, because they knew who they would be dealing with, or those who did run for office decided to step down once they understood who their competitor was. And also another option is that it's an incumbent mayor, and there are examples for that, people who were very successful. Muhammed, I'm sorry, we need to start wrapping up. Yes, of course. I'll skip the gender data because so why don't you tell us a bit about the trends and the results? Yes, 2 more slides, 1 minute. So we can see that when it comes to the final outcome, 45% of the mayors who were elected were incumbent.
كادنسيا
they were elected for another term of office for another 5 years, or in this case, actually, this time it's going to be only 4 years. 42% are completely new, did not have any position in the past, did not serve in the past. This is why they won the public's trust, and 13% of the elected mayors are previous or former mayors. They did a comeback. They were mayors in the past. They didn't serve in the last term of office. Now they ran for office again and received the trust of their constituency. So this is an increase in the number of previous mayors, and we can see a drop in the power of new mayors. And if we'll try to summarize through this chart with the affiliation of the winners, those who won the election, we can see that over 80% of the elected mayors are candidates or mayors who are clan affiliated. They either represent one big clan or several clans who came together, so they are committed to them, and their decision making and negotiations is based on that. 13% are independent, not affiliated either with a clan or political party, and 8% are party affiliated, political party affiliated. I can tell you that there's a drop in the political policy with respect to the representation of the mayors and in the city council, and this will have an impact on the national council and the political orientation of the Arab local authorities. And on the national aspect, then Imad will talk about that soon. Thank you very much.
Interesting and a lot to absorb, but we'll get back to you to talk also about mixed cities maybe later. So let's move to Dr. Rana Zaher Karayani. We all know that gender representation in general is a painful issue in Arab society, and I have to say also in the Jewish society as far as political representation goes. So how did it manifest itself in the current elections? Rana, please.
Okay, thank you, Michal. Thank you, Liron, for hosting us today. So I'm going to talk about the representation of Palestinian Arab women in Israel in the local authorities and the municipalities against this background that my colleagues have just presented, according to which the nationalist power is declining and family-based or clan-based list power is increasing. And interestingly, all of this happening amid a very, aggressive war, conflicts, and also organized crime that are hitting the Palestinian Arab society in Israel, which makes the story much more complex, especially for women. Still, we at Injaz believe that the representation of women in politics is crucial and vital, especially in areas of conflict and areas of complexities, not only to, promote gender equality, but also to strengthen democratic values and processes, which we believe always get compromised and weakened during war times and conflicts. Still, from the analysis of the most recent elections results, we noticed the following trends. Though we, as a civil society in Israel, a Palestinian Arab civil society in Israel, and in the heart of which, of course, you can find Injaz and other NGOs, though we pride ourselves on the fact that we have managed to raise the number of Palestinian women municipal politicians from, say, 3 in 2003 to 20 to 23 recently, 2024. And more specifically, if you want more specific numbers, we were 3 women in 2003, and the number raised to 5 women in 2008. And from 5, we managed to climb to a higher number of 10 in 2013. That was the term in which I served as a city council member. From 10, we managed to raise the number to 25 in 2018. And recently, we have managed to more or less keep that number, though we have also seen a slight drop in the representation of women. And the slight drop in the representation of women in 2024 elections are clearly due to two main reasons, which have surfaced in a lot of research studies and analysis from different bodies and organizations. This drop is ascribed to A, the war, and B, the fear of women, of Arab women, and also Jewish women in general, but Arab women in particular, of the organized crime and of the physical attacks that have that many public representatives, many local politicians, especially men, have suffered lately. So fear of violence, physical violence, not only verbal violence, and the war have had their toll on the representation of women, but not only on the representation of women. Our analysis have also revealed that the number of women candidates have dropped this year. Those who were elected, were the 23 women who were elected, were in guaranteed places in the front of the lists. But the number of the women candidates dropped significantly. And this is a statement that needs to be, of course, further studied and explored. Sadly, up until now, 2024, we have 0 women holding office as a head of a local authority or as a mayor. Though the patriarchal conservative Arab community started to, accept the idea gradually that women can also do politics, and though the level of education, the level of employment, the level of political awareness among Palestinian Arab women in Israel have increased dramatically, still we don't see any translation of all these trends, politically speaking, in the position of mayorhood. We're probably heading to that place because recently we have noticed that while we don't have any female mayor yet, we do have women heading lists, which is, quite nice and recent phenomenon. And not only women, married women or single women, but women who culturally are placed at the bottom of the social pyramid, namely divorced women and widowed women. So this new development of having widowed or divorced women heading lists is a notable development that also needs to be encouraged and further explored. So yet still, the number of these women heading these lists is minimal. We're talking about 6 women out of almost 890 something politician. So 6 out of 800 something, that's really minimal. That's almost nothing, but still in our context, that's a great progress. So maybe we're on the way, we're preparing the ground for the first woman mayor, hopefully in the future. Another interesting development that has surfaced in our analysis is that most of the elected women, 50% to be exact, came from national lists, from national parties lists, while the other 43% of women were represented in independent, non-partisan lists. Pardon? Okay. And while the other 7% came actually from family-based or clan-based lists, which is actually a phenomenon which we do not encourage much, simply because these family-based or clan-based lists are non-democratic in essence, and they usually use women, and I'm using the word use between parentheses, use women to attract voters, and at the end, they exclude them from materializing and prevent them from materializing their right to be represented. So we learned that most of the women actually come from either politically affiliated parties or national parties lists, or lists that are affiliated with independent people. These are the two main circles or platforms through which women get access to municipal politics. Like I said, despite the strides, the improvements in the level of education, in the level of employment, and political awareness, we still haven't made it. We're on the way. Arab women still face a lot of complex and intersected obstacles, whether structural obstacles, being women in a highly conservative and patriarchal society, being Arab in a Jewish state, and being, the weakest link, economically speaking, or economically and socially speaking, in a capitalist reality. Women are facing, so many obstacles, but we at Injaz and, other institutions of the Palestinian Arab Society are working on paving the way for these brave women to make it, and also to present as an example or a role model for other, for the younger generation of women who wish also to integrate into local politics. We have made a long way, but we know that there's still a lot of work ahead of us and waiting for us.
Thank you.
Need your support.
Thank you, Rana. Inshallah. So there are already some questions. Before we open it for questions, Muhammad, would you like to say something about the results in the mixed cities?
כן, אני ברשותכם מתייחס לשני דברים הקשורים לערים המעורבות. כללי המשחק בערים המעורבות הם שונים. אי אפשר לגזור נתונים המלמדים על אחוזי הצבעה בגלל שחלק מהקלפיות הם מצביעים יהודים וערבים, אבל יש ירידה בייצוג של הערבים בערים המעורבות לעומת הבחירות שקדמו להם. הבחירות הקודמות היו 28 נציגים ערבים בתוך בתי הנבחרים המקומיים, בבחירות הנוכחיות צנח ל-26, אבל זה עדיין אחוז יותר גדול מאחוז הערבים בערים המעורבות. מדברים על 17% מכלל נבחרי הציבור בערים המעורבות הם ערבים, זה אחוז יותר גבוה למעשה הייצוג הדמוגרפי שלהם, ומה שמעניין למעשה גם בערים המעורבות זה אחוז הייצוג המגדרי, והוא הרבה יותר גבוה למעשה המצב ברשויות המקומיות הערביות. אנחנו מדברים על 20% מכלל נבחרי הציבור הערבים בערים המעורבות הם נשים, וגם אם נכנסים לעובי הקורה ומנסים לגזור מזה ולחלץ מזה תובנות סוציו-דמוגרפיות, נבחרי הציבור ברמת בתי הנבחרים המקומיים, המועצות הרשויות המקומיות, הם אנשים שמגיעים עם רקורד ועם עשייה, עם מספר גדול יותר של קדנציות ועם רמת השכלה יותר גבוהה מכלל נבחרי הציבור ברשויות המקומיות הערביות. הבסיס הפוליטי
elected officials in the local authorities. The political basis and the organizing principle of elections in mixed cities is still national, and the impact of the clan and the family background is much smaller, to a point that it's even non-existent in some of the mixed cities.
So there are a couple of questions here. I think, Jeffrey, why don't you just ask your questions? Would you like to just ask them? Well, there is one question about Khamulot. I don't know who wants to answer. Jeffrey?
Okay. Yes, I'm going back to my question. Okay, first one is, I had no idea of the predominance of clans in local government in Arab towns. What are the implications of that, the power of the clans for issues such as crime, competence, and corruption? Are there any advantages? And any of the speakers could answer that.
جاوبي رنا.
Yes, just a second, I'm just looking at the question one more time. The implications, the effect of the clans on crime, competence, corruption. Like I said in my presentation, clan-based lists, rarely advance liberal values like, integrating women, minorities, or educated people into politics. They usually exclude these people from access to politics because they have their own economic interests as families and as clans that they want to preserve. According to a lot of studies and research, sadly, the clans or these families are in a constant interaction with organized crime groups or forums or groups. Let me put it this way, and that there's some kind of cooperation between the two institutions, the clan-based lists and the crime groups, because they both feed on each other's resources, and they both advance each other's interests. And of course, that has implications on the level of corruption, on the level of preservation of democratic values. And that's why we tend to question the legitimacy of these lists. Though by law, they're legal. You can't, by law, you can't, ban them, boycott them, or do anything about them. But at least culturally, in our political culture, we try to shake their credibility and question their legitimacy. That was regarding the first question. The second question, whether I support the ideas of reserving seats on local councils for women. Yes, by all means, at least as a transitional phase, as a transitional procedure, until we, manage to as a community and as people to internalize the right of women to political representation. Like I said, there are a lot of challenges and obstacles, many of which are structural, cultural, and in order for us to make it, we need also to be very wise about it. So yes, I do support reserving seats for women, at least as a transitional phase, and probably for the younger generation of women who lack probably political knowledge and expertise and who still want to make it. Another procedure that I'd like to see happening in our community and also in our Israeli society is one that is economic. The government usually it supports and it finances lists that introduce women in guaranteed places, it awards them financially. It gives financial incentives for lists that introduce women in guaranteed places. That's good. But it doesn't penalize lists that doesn't have any consideration for any gender, representation or women representation. So I think in addition to these incentives, penalties should be introduced if we want to make a serious progress on the level of, the government.
Thank you, Rana. Thank you. We'll move to other questions because I see there are many. And then if any of you want to add something about the Khamulot, please, Imad, Ken.
I want to say something
Go ahead.
about the violence. By the way, regarding the representation of women, some of the Arab parties have changed their constitutions. At least there should be at least one candidate amongst the first four candidates. For example, in Ra'am, the Ra'am party, they changed their constitution, and there must be female representation. One of the first four candidates. Now, regarding the subject of violence, I think it's a very important subject. A few years ago, we suffered from this as the Arab society, and now the implications of this problem is starting to trickle into the rest of the society, to the Jewish society as well. Now, regarding the strengthening of the independent stream, the pragmatic stream in the Arab community, more civil society organizations are now getting involved in the professional activities of the Arab local governance. I think that the mayors and the civil society organizations have taken some very bold, very brave measures, at least over the past 18 months. For example, mayors and civil society organizations met with the head, the director of the Shabak, the ISA, the Shin Bet, and there's also government resolution 549 about eradicating violence in the Arab sector, where there are sections that talk about strengthening the police. And in government resolution 922, there were millions of shekels for the purpose of opening up police stations in Arab towns and villages. And there was hardly any objection to any of that. These things could not have happened a few years ago. And I think that the Arab society, the political and professional leadership of the Arab society and the civil society organizations, they did everything they could. They were really courageous and they took some very brave steps. And I just gave you some examples. The fact that they met with the director of the Shin Bet and allocating government budgets for the construction of police stations, but all of that did not help. I guess political resolution needs to be made by the Israeli government, by the different ministries, in order to eradicate this phenomenon, especially because we keep hearing in the Hebrew-speaking media that some of the crime organizations are collaborating with some of the security organizations. So this is why it's so difficult to eradicate it. I think that in our society, the professional organizations and the leadership, they did everything they could in order to try to eradicate this phenomenon. Now this ball is on the other side.
Patiently. Victor, please, you need to unmute yourself. So,
thank you.
Sure.
I found this look at Arab democracy in Israel to be very illuminating and certainly far different than are perceived by most people, especially in the United States. And I thank you for your efforts. If I may, I would like to jump to the bottom line. So how many different parties are represented when you take all the successful candidates together? How many different parties and clans are represented? And very briefly, what do these parties, the leading parties, represent in terms of what we think they want to accomplish?
Would you like me to answer that?
Thank you.
Well, I can partially answer that. Well, in terms of political parties, national parties, the number is actually, you know, is known to everybody, because in general there are only three, or yeah, let's put it this way, three main political streams with which political parties, national political parties, are affiliated. Either the Democratic Front for Peace and Equality, known as Khadash, which is actually the leading political party among the Arabs in Israel. There's also the Islamic Party, and there's also the National Assembly, which has, you know, lost its power and its representation from the Knesset lately, but still has some echo in local politics in the Palestinian Arab society. So I believe that these are the three main national streams or national parties that are represented in the local government in the
No, and I think the question was about the many parties that Muhammad was talking about. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I probably misunderstood him.
I think so. It was Muhammad was talking about many parties that were competing in the
many independent lists.
Exactly.
I don't know how many. Probably Muhammad knows. Muhammad, do you know how many?
كان הנושא הוא מאוד מורכב,
Well, this issue is very complicated because candidates who are partisans affiliated, ultimately they also rely on a clan setting. So the parties already back in the 1970s, especially after 1975, they realized that it would be useful for them to have candidates that belong to clans. My doctorate is even on this subject, and I saw that 50% of the public elected officials who come from parties belong to the biggest clans in the town or village. So they were affiliated with a party, but the clan aspect was not neglected. It's still definitely alive and kicking in the Arab local authorities. There's another phenomena of party candidates who are members of a party, but they run as independent candidates. They're trying to kind of conceal their ideological, political affiliation, and that is related to a more global phenomenon, the weakening of political parties. But in the Israeli reality, it's what I call double delegitimization. The Arab political parties are experiencing double delegitimization. On the one hand, senior ministers in the Israeli government are constantly doubting and undermining the ability of the Arab parties to represent. They keep saying they only represent the Palestinians. They're busy with the West Bank and Gaza. They aren't doing anything for the daily lives of Israeli Arabs. This is a slogan we keep hearing, and the Arab population has internalized these messages, and because of oppressive relations, the Arab sector also penalizes issues, red ticket, the yellow first ticket. The yellow ticket is from the ministers, and out of a fear to raise the antagonism and hostility of the government ministries, and then they won't get any budgets. And this is why the Arab population is also penalizing the Arab parties. And I can also say on a more critical note that the performance of the Arab parties,
כלומר, once שהם נכנסו לתפקיד שלהם, הם ניסו לעשות אדפטציה כדי להישאר בתפקיד, כדי להיבחר שוב, זה גרם להם להגביר את הציפיות של הציבור, אבל ברמת הביצועים לאכזב את הציבור, כי הציפיות מהם היו הרבה יותר גדולות, לכן הציבור שלף כרטיס אדום למפלגות ונתן להם לנהל את שירות האופוזיציה.
Okay, we're almost at 1 p.m. New York time, 8 p.m. our time, so I'm so sorry. Can you stay a couple of more minutes? Muhammad, Rana, Imad,
Yeah,
is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so shall we do one more question from Yosef and then final round? I think Yosef wanted to ask about the Bedouins, right?
Yeah, no, thank you. Tomorrow I'm going on a Bedouin solar tour, but I haven't checked to see if there's been any major changes from the elections in the Bedouin sector. A lot of times we as donors were presented with like national Arab trends. And then when you zoom in on the Arab sector, things are a bit different, or there's different trends, or it's going backwards or something. So I'm wondering if there's a difference from the municipal elections in the Bedouin sector, or does it follow the national trends?
Thank you. Okay, so 2 sentences about the Bedouins, whoever wants to talk, and then Imad, if you want to close with us. Thank you.
אם תרשו לי, אני אענה
Well,
באופן
if
תמציתי
I
על
may, I'll briefly
הניסיון
succinctly
להציג
answer
תמונה
the attempt
שונה
to present a
בקרב
different
הבדואים היא
picture
מלאכותית
among the Bedouins is
ואינה
artificial
נכונה, אין לה אחיזה
and
במציאות.
incorrect.
כלומר, מה
It
שקורה
has
בחברה הערבית קורה גם
no
בחברה הבדואית. כלומר, מה
basis in
שקורה בחברה
reality.
הבדואית
Everything that
מתקבל,
happens in
אבל
the
יש
Arab
את
society
הממדים,
happens in the
את
Bedouin
הממדים
sector
של
as
התופעה.
well.
בגלל שמדובר
Maybe the
שם
only
בחמולות
differences
יותר
are in
גדולות, מה
the
שנקרא
scope or scale of
עשאר,
the phenomena, because the clans there are much
שהם
bigger.
בתי אב יותר גדולים שמאוחדים
The
בתוך מה
households there
שנקרא
are
חמולה
much
אחת יותר
bigger,
גדולה.
which are
אז הביטוי
united
של
into one
התופעות שאנחנו
larger
ראינו
clan. So the
ביתר החברה הערבית
manifestation
הם
of the
דומים, אבל
phenomena we
מקבלים
saw throughout
משנה
the
תוקף
Arab
או בולטות
sector
יותר
are
גדולה
pretty
בחברה
much the
הבדואית.
same,
לכן
but they just become
הכוחות
more
החמולתיים
prominent. So the
יש להם
clan
ייצוג הגדול
forces
ביותר.
have the greatest
הכוחות
representation, the
המפלגתיים,
largest
במיוחד
representation.
רע"מ,
The
שיש
party
לה
forces, especially
דווקא
Ra'am, which
נוכחות
actually
מסיבית
has a
ובולטת
massive and prominent
בנגב,
presence
במיוחד ביישוב
in the
הבדואי
Negev,
בנגב,
especially in the
היא נחלשה
Bedouin
בבחירות
towns and
האחרונות, אבל
villages
לא
in the
נחלשה
Negev. It has weakened
בגלל
in these
שהיא
recent
לא
elections,
נבחרה,
but it
בגלל
hasn't
שהיא הסירה
weakened
את
because it
המועמדות
wasn't
שלה מכמה
elected, but
יישובים
because it
מטעמים
stepped down,
ושיקולים
it
פוליטיים.
took out
כלומר,
its candidacy from some of the
רע"מ
towns and villages for
מתכוננת,
political considerations.
מתחממת על
That is,
הקווים
Ra'am
לקראת הבחירות
is
לכנסת,
preparing for the
וכדי
national elections to the
להכעיס את הקהילה
Knesset,
המקומית
and in order
והיישובים
to
בנגב, הם
um,
בחרו
not
למעשה
upset the
להניא
local
את עצמם
communities, they
מהתחרות המקומית,
decided
כי
not to
אם
participate in
יתחרו ויש
the
סמיכות זמנים
local
וכולם מדברים על
elections,
בחירות
and because if
קרובות,
they'll be
אז
elected,
הם
and
יכעיסו
everybody's saying
חלקים
that the national
בתוך
elections will happen
היישובים,
soon,
ולכן הם
so
רוצים
they will
לנסות
upset
לקבל
some
יותר, כי
certain
זה אחד הבייסים
groups
הגדולים
within these
ביותר
towns and
מבחינה
villages,
אלקטורלית
and
של רע"מ, ולכן רואים את
so
התמציत
it's
של הדבר
their
הזה.
largest electorate,
הבעיה,
so
אחת
that's why it's so
הבעיות
important to them.
היותר
And one
גדולות
of the
שם,
problems, one
שאין
of the
אפילו
bigger
אישה אחת
problems there is
המיוצגת
that
בתוך
there isn't
הרשויות
even one
המקומיות
woman
הבדואיות, במיוחד
represented
בנגב.
in the
הייתה
Arab local
מועמדת
authorities,
אחת
especially in the Negev. There
בתוך
was
אחת
one
הרשימות, המועמדת
female
הייתה במקום לא
candidate in
ריאלי.
one of the lists, but she
כלומר,
was in
גם
an
אם הייצוג של
unrealistic
הערבי,
place.
של הנשים
So
הערביות ברשויות המקומיות הערביות הוא
even if the
נמוך,
representation of
בחברה
Arab women
הבדואית
in
הוא
Arab local
יותר
authorities is
קריטי, יותר
low, in
אקוטי,
the
בגלל שגם
Bedouin
לא
sector
מתמודדות
it's
בכלל.
even smaller
זה
than that
שני
because they don't run it
הדברים
all, they don't
הבולטים,
participate at all.
וזהו,
These are
אני...
the main differences.
שוכרן,
That's it.
שוכרן, מעניין.
תודה.
Thank you, that was
Imad,
interesting.
for your final remarks, אתה יכול לומר גם משהו על ההשפעה של
Imad, can you say
הבחירות האלה
something
על
about
ארגוני
the
הפשע ועל
impact
הקשר
of
בין
these
חמולות
elections
לארגוני
on the
פשע? אני רואה
crime
שהשאלה הזאת
organizations and the
חוזרת.
connection between the clans and the crime organizations? Because I see
I'm
this
sorry,
question
I had
keeps
asked
reappearing on the chat.
early on about the increase in Arab criminal families in the political elections, and nobody has addressed that issue. I joined this call because of that issue. I see you guys as the experts on this, and I'd like it addressed.
Thank you, sure. אתה במיוט.
You're muted.
We can't hear you, Imad.
אמרתי לך, אל תדבר על השב"כ, בכל זאת דיברת על השב"כ, השתיקו אותך. קבל.
כן, נכון, אז...
Okay.
אני חושב,
I
או
think,
לפחות,
or
אני
at
בשונה
least,
ממקרים רבים
unlike
בחיים שלי, אני
in many
אופטימי מהתוצאות
other cases of my life, I'm actually optimistic
של הבחירות לרשויות
with the
המקומיות לאור
results from the elections to the local
הנתונים
authorities,
והדברים שהציג מוחמד ודוקטור
with
רנה.
everything that Muhammad and
אני
Dr.
חושב
Rana
שיש
presented.
אופטימיות
Despite all that, I think
בתוצאות,
there is room for optimism in these
במיוחד
results,
כי
especially
ההשלכות
because
שלהם הם על
their
כלל
ramifications,
החברה הערבית.
these results
חיזוק
have an
הזרם
impact on the
העצמאי,
general
יותר
Arab
ראשי רשויות,
sector,
או
the
לפחות
strengthening of the independent
תחילת
stream,
תהליך
more mayors, or at least it's the beginning of this process,
יותר
which is
ראשי רשויות
growing
עצמאיים,
stronger and strengthened, more
מקצועיים, בעלי
independent,
הון
professional
מקצועי, בעלי
mayors
הון
who have a professional capital, a cultural capital, and even many of them whom we know have a cosmopolitical capital, even though most of them come from clans, but even the clans have changed their voting to the mayor who's running on their behalf. They make sure that that candidate has cosmopolitan and cultural capital, professional capital. So these results can make the Council of the National Council of Arab Mayors in Israel to be a leading organization in the Arab sector, as we had at the beginning of the millennium. Especially I remember when I was 16 or 17 years old back in 2006, when the National Council of Arab Mayors in Israel led a very interesting process of writing the vision papers for the Arab sector, talking about the civilian integration of the Arab minority, while at the same time maintaining their unique and collective identity. And since then, the issue of full citizenship impact on national politics, this has truly strengthened in the Arab sector. Yes?
I'm sorry, I want to make sure that, especially because we're past time. I think there's a question in the room about how to understand the influence of criminal organizations today, with crime being such a big concern for Arab society. And we've been hearing for so many years, you started off by talking about the way that criminal organizations intimidate candidates. There's also been concerns about criminal organizations tapping into government budgets. And I think that when we speak about the intimidation, the question is, how can we understand the line between the candidates that won and the criminal organizations themselves? And is there a way to answer that clearly?
לירון, אני אנסה לסכם ואני אגיע
Well, I'll try to summarize, Liron, and then I'll get to the
הקשר שלו
crime
לרשויות
issue as
המקומיות.
well
אבל
and
חשוב
its
לי
connection
להדגיש
to
גם
local
מספר
authorities, but it's also
השפעות של
important for me
התוצאות
to
האלו, ואני
emphasize
אסכם
some
את
of
זה
the impacts of these results,
על
and I
הפשע.
will summarize what I
אני
have
חושב
to say
בקדנציה
about crime.
הקודמת
I think that in the previous term,
התחלנו בשינוי מאוד
we
משמעותי.
started with
הצטרפות
very
נציגי
significant
החברה הערבית
change, the
ברשויות של
fact
הערים
that
המעורבות לוועד ראשי הרשויות. במיוחד
the
אחרי אירועי מאי,
representatives from the
המשך
national
בחיזוק
councils of mixed cities
האקוסיסטם
joined the National
בין
Council of
ארגוני
Arab
החברה
Mayors,
האזרחית
and
וועד
this
ראשי
has
הרשויות,
further
יצירת
strengthened
שפה
the
מקצועית,
ecosystem and the
חלוקת
creation of a
תפקידים, זה מאוד
professional
השפיע.
language, a division
ואני
of
חושב
labor,
שהתוצאות
and
האלו
this had a
חיזוק
major impact. And I
המקצועיות,
think that
אנשים,
these results to the
ראשי
strengthening
רשויות
of
יותר
the
מקצועיים ויותר
professionalism. The
פרגמטיים,
mayors now
עשויים
are more
לחזק את
professional and more
ההסכם הזה.
pragmatic, and
הפיכת
that can
הוועד
strengthen
ראשי
this
הרשויות כגוף
ecosystem.
ייצוגי
And
קולקטיבי
the fact
מקצועי
that this
ופחות
is a
אידיאולוגי,
representative, professional, collective
לאור
organization and less
היחלשות
an ideological one, the
המפלגות,
Council of
דעיכת
Arab
המפלגות
Mayors, in view
הפוליטיות
of
בחברה
the
הערבית, כל
demise or
הדברים
the
האלו,
decline in the power
התוצאות
of
האלו
national Arab
יכולים
parties. I
להשפיע
think that all
על
these
הוועד,
results
על
can
החברה
impact the
הערבית, חיזוק השיח הפרגמטי
Council and the
והמקצועי.
Arab
מכאן
society,
אני
strengthening the professional and
אחבר
pragmatic
את זה
discourse. And now I would
לנושא
like to
האלימות
link this to the
והפשיעה.
issue
זה
of
לא סוד
violence and crime. It is no
שהרבה
secret
מארגוני החברה, מארגוני הפשע,
that many of the crime organizations
נכנסים לראשי הרשויות. זה לא קורה עכשיו, זה
are involved in
הצטברות מסוימת
with
שקרה,
some of the
שאני
mayors. It
חושב זה
didn't just
בעקבות
start
החלטות
now.
ממשלה כאשר יש
I think
יותר
it
כסף.
happened. It's
ושוב
also
אני
a
אדגיש
result
את
of government
עמדתי,
resolutions now that
אני
there's
חושב
more
שהחברה
money.
הערבית
I'd
הייתה
like to
מאוד
emphasize
אמיצה
my position.
ברמת
I think that
ההנהגה
the
וברמה
Arab
המקצועית.
society was very brave, both on the
ישבו עם
professional level and
השב"כ
on the level of the leadership. They
לפתור
met
את הבעיה,
with the
תקציבים
Shin Bet in
בהחלטות
order to
הממשלה,
solve
ואף
this
אחד לא
problem. There were
התנגד. עשרות
government budgets and
תחנות
resolutions
משטרה,
for
ואפילו
the
כל
opening of
הפתרונות
dozens of police stations, and
ששמה
even
הממשלה
all
על
the
השולחן
solutions
ביום ראשון
presented by the government. Just this past Sunday, Injaz and the National Council of Arab Mayors, we were in the meeting with the Treasury, and now all of a sudden we are hearing another solution that we didn't hear about in the past, to transfer the budgets and the management of tenders from the local authorities to government agencies such as Eshkolot. But we also know, or at least we're hearing, that even these organizations are monitoring these budgets when the budget is transferred to somewhere else and not the local authority. And I heard, so this is why I think that this issue needs to be addressed from the root. It doesn't have to do with the transfer of money from element X to Y, because these organizations have methods how to monitor these budgets. And I guess in Israel, not only some of the local authorities are corrupt, many other agencies are corrupt, and that's a way for these agencies to monitor the budgets. There are different methods, and there were a lot of things that happened that have nothing, that were not related to the local authorities, but they've managed to take over some of the budgets. So that's why I think that this issue needs to be addressed from the root of the problem, and there should be a political decision to eradicate. Imad, let me just, if I could really briefly say something very important. In the national elections, we've seen campaigns calling the Arab population to try rules trying to depress or oppress the right of the Arab sector to vote. For example, the law about the CCTVs, etc. In the elections to the local authorities, we saw a different phenomenon. What was challenged in the local authorities is the right to be elected, because the democracy is based on the right to be elected. Candidates who are challenging mayors in order to advance their towns and village are presenting themselves as alternatives, and then the crime organizations threaten them, intimidate them, and force them to step down and remove their candidacy. And if a democracy, a local democracy or a local governance is an expression of our democracy, and it is supposed to allow people to fulfill their rights to elect and be elected and to provide all the responses to the local community, both of these rights are being challenged. Therefore, the local democracy is not fulfilling its role, and therefore there is a problem. There's a significant flaw in the municipal system, as long as the deeply rooted causes are not being addressed, not just the crime organization, but also issues of, young people who are looking for meaning and for power, and the unemployment alongside with a lack of enforcement. Of course, until you address all these, you won't find a solution to this problem.
Talk about crime in another day. Thank you all
I have also provided some kind of an answer in the chat.
Thank you, Yana.
Have a look.
Thank you, Rana. Thank you, Rana, Imad, Muhammad. Thank you, everybody, for staying with us so long.
Thank you very much for hosting us. Hope we meet you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you to all the speakers and everyone who stuck around for the whole call. Thank you to the wonderful simultaneous translator. We would love your feedback if you're still on how this worked for you. Thank you very much.
Wow.
And we can maybe debrief on WhatsApp and let so
Okay.